Privilege and entitlement should always be on our minds as Christians. Privilege and entitlement should always be on our minds as Christians, as followers of Jesus. Jesus is constantly teaching us that those who think they're important are not, and those who think they're entitled are not. This week's scripture has two great passages about that, and two great stories about the feast. And Jesus speaks about the first story, is about don't go to a feast and put yourself by the host so as to look good, because inevitably somebody's going to come along who's more important, right? And then you get bumped to the place of the lowest place and you'll feel ashamed. And then the second one is about, treating friends who you know will treat you back. Or pay it forward, as they say in the 21st century. I'm not going to preach about that. I'm going to preach about the first one, because it reminded me of entitlement and privilege and all the stuff that we're not supposed to be about. It's a good scripture for September 1st, because tomorrow the school zones go into action. Don't forget, 30 kilometers an hour. Folks, you'll lose 8 seconds. That's it. 8 seconds off your drive. Oh, I've got 3, Reverend Dave. So you lose 24 seconds. Is that right? 24 seconds off your drive. 24 seconds. But you won't hit a kid. Oh boy, if you want to see entitlement at place, watch how we drive through school zones. People pass me, past Bedford High School, they pass me. There's not 2 lanes in front of Bedford School. Anyway, I've preached enough about school zones. But they're about entitlement, our misuse of them. Just wanted you to notice. On the surface, this teaching by Jesus is a simple social teaching. I mean, it's just like he could have been telling his friends, look, here's something I've noticed. If you don't want to become ashamed, don't do this. Right? That's easy. It's a really good thing he pointed out. Don't move up front. Sit in the back, or sit to the far end. Don't sit near the host, and you won't be embarrassed. And if you're lucky, nobody else really important, and the host will say, hey, friend, down there at the end, come on and sit up with me, and then you'll be honored. It's good. That's just practical right there about good party going to him, right? But that's not why he told the story. He told it because Jesus knew that the table is an image for our larger society, always, forever. Our dinner tables model so much what we think our society should look like, act like, and be like. Don't talk about politics and religion at the table, like that kind of stuff, but societal. Okay? So Jesus is using the table as a teaching for the bigger society, the greater society. It's a miniature example, the table, of what was happening everywhere. Privilege and entitlement. Jesus saw it, spoke against it all the time. I've preached on entitlement quite a bit. School zones being one of my favorite rants about that. Today, privilege is what caught me. Privilege is what caught me in my ears, and immediately it got attached to another word. White privilege. White privilege. It's a phrase. You've heard it. Have you heard it? None of you are nodding. Nobody wants to even admit they've heard the term white privilege. It's a hot topic in justice circles these days. Extremely important, in my mind, for the future of Canada as a healthy nation. Understanding white privilege. I'm going to say it one more time. White privilege. Are you uncomfortable yet? White privilege. Let's stop and check in. If you hear the phrase white privilege, what happens inside of you? Did you see it on the billboard a year and a half ago the city put up? There's a face of a man saying, I'm wrestling with my white privilege. Oh boy, did they get letters at the city about that. What's happening inside of you when you hear that phrase? I want to tell you a few things in this loving space of Mayfair. When you hear the words white privilege, you are not personally being called a racist. It's not the same thing. It's not about an individual person. You also may ask in conversations when you hear about white privilege or people going on about it, and they're saying important things about it, you might ask what some people have said to me, and children ask their parents, parents ask their friends, is it wrong to be white? Have you wondered that these days? When we talk about reconciliation, we talk about white privilege, when we talk about racism in cities of Saskatoon, which is rampant, do you sometimes think, well, is it just so bad being white? Am I supposed to feel wrong about that? No. The answer is no. It's not a conversation that's meant to make you feel guilty or ashamed on a personal level. Because frankly, folks, it'll get you nowhere. Guilt and shame on this topic will get us nowhere, just leave us stuck where we are. And they're honest. These are honest defensive reactions in the hearts of many people. They protect us, these kind of knee-jerk responses. What, is it so wrong being white? I'm not allowed to be white anymore? I've heard it. They're honest reactions, and sometimes those emotional reactions protect us, but we got to be careful not to get too protected, because sometimes we use those not to move and not to change, not to follow Jesus. So I wanted to take some time just to talk about white privilege, because it's an important topic, but we don't talk about it enough in the church. Saw a great, thanks to Wikipedia, that knows all things. Here's a great quote from Peggy McIntosh, a scholar and activist. White privilege is an invisible package of unearthed assets. I like that. She also talks about a backpack that we carry around of privilege, those of us with white skin. It's an invisible package of unearthed assets. It's not overt. It's not an overt bias or prejudice, not a single action from one person to another. It's mostly unseen for those who look like me, less obvious. It's advantages that people with white skin enjoy that people of color do not. Maybe if we called it white advantage, people would understand a little easier. Hey, have you been talking about white advantage? So these kind of advantages, privileges include cultural affirmations of one's own worth. Being white's awesome. Being white's awesome. I hear that a lot. I see it in movies. I see it in cartoons. I see it in advertising. Being white's awesome. Or, let's see, that white people have a greater social status and are supposed to. That we have a greater freedom to move, buy, purchase, work, play, speak freely. All those things. And the effects can be seen in the professional, educational, and in personal contexts. It's about the hidden benefits that come from being the majority in this country. White privilege is about a world that's geared toward my success because of the color of my skin. I know some love to say, well, I worked hard for what I have. Probably true. I worked hard for my grad degree. I hate reading. Somehow I squeaked through a grad degree. I don't know how. I've read and read and read my pants off, and it was tough work. But the only reason I was able to work hard at a grad degree is because I was able to have an undergraduate degree, and the only reason I had an undergraduate degree is because I was allowed to finish high school and was given all the supports I needed, like food and clean water and a home and a bed and a dad who had a steady work. They actually called it a career back in the day. So all those things led to my ability to go to school so that I could work hard. But I was given these things first. It was set up for my success. In Saskatchewan, we have the pioneer spirit. We love to say, well, our families, they came here and they worked hard on the land and stuff. When you're ever trying to think about white privilege, just work backwards far enough. Like the land was given for free to Eastern Europeans. Much of the land was given out for free, right? And in fact, it was land that was taken from other people. So there's privilege right there. Just work backwards if you're wondering how it's touched your life. White privilege also exists on a global scale. Walt Disney and globalization and all that kind of stuff, couple world wars, colonialism, have kind of planted the seeds, they actually planted the seeds of white privilege all over the world. Attitudes expressed through globalization. That white North American way of life is how everyone should live. That the culture of North America is somehow the height of civilization. That we've got to take how many times you heard an American president say this? We got to take our form of freedom and democracy, and it's a gift to the world that we're given. Often attached to our style of economics and religious beliefs. I got permission to tell a story today from my colleague and friend David Kim Craig. Preached here lots. You know him. Sweet guy. Well, when David and his wife Hiran, who's from South Korea, go home to South Korea, and Hiran is a world-known scholar and professor. Theology and ministry life, and now preaching professor in Toronto. When they go back to her home city, David is deferred to in public. People come up to speak to David because he's a tall white man. They're excited to see him in the marketplaces. But he said, I asked him yesterday, can you give me some really concrete examples? And he said, very tough, except this. He gets offered college jobs, university jobs over there, positions as a teacher, that Hiran is like 4 times more qualified to teach. But the college wants so much for a white man from North America to be on their faculty. In fact, one time when he was leaving a position in Korea as a chaplain, English-speaking chaplain, they said, what will we ever do without you? We don't know how to replace you. And he said, I know a whole bunch of English-speaking people from another Asian country who would love to take this position. They said, no, we're really looking for a white man. Said that out loud. That's white privilege on the global scale. I'm going to pause and tell you I am not an expert on this subject whatsoever. I'm still learning. I'm still watching. I see white privilege sometimes, and I miss it most of the time. And I actually got to say, frankly, I know this. I enjoy the ease and comfort it has brought to my life. Being a 6'5" white guy in Canada is a real cushy job. It's a real cushy place to be. And I do actually kind of enjoy that a little bit. I'm going to listen to Jesus. Once when I was a nervous preteen, this came to me this week. My dad, I think it was raining and there were a bunch of people in front of the grocery store front door and blockage of carts or something, but he wanted to duck in quick to the store. And so, or maybe it's a bunch of cars, he says, come on, Dave. And he cuts parcel pickup door. Remember parcel pickup? And he cuts to the door. You know what it says on the door? Staff only. And I was like this nervous 12-year-old, more like my mother, not like my dad yet. And I was like, those are rules. Staff only, those are the rules. We can't go through there. My dad goes, come on, Dave. I'm like, come on. In we go, and we, it's 2 steps across the special holding area for parcel pickup dudes, and then into the grocery store. But, we're into the grocery store in a different place than the front door would bring. All of it felt just bad. And he turned around, and he could see it on my face. I said, Dad, we shouldn't have done that, Dad, come on. He says this, look like you belong, Dave. Just look like you belong, nobody will bother you. I now realize many years later, that I look like I belong everywhere in Canada. In our screwed up sense of what Canada should look like. Why would I ever have worried that someone would stop me in the parcel pickup door? Or my dad, 6'6". Why would I have ever realized? I now realize that my white skin affords me a whole lot of power, and it's a power that comes from normality and being part of the majority. If you want to dig a little deeper into how white privilege works, I lift up this word, suspicion. It's a good one in Saskatoon. Suspicion is a great example of how white privilege works. Because when I walk into a store, no one ever suspicious that I'm there to steal stuff. I got a lot of good stuff. First job mart. Great. No, I don't take stuff. Nobody suspects me at all. I never get followed in a store. Kids have never been followed in a store. But there are children in this congregation who will always be followed in stores because of the color of their skin. White privilege means that I have never, ever been, that the police just don't suspicious. What's the word? Suspect, thank you. I love the word suspicious so much, I couldn't get rid of it. Police never suspect me of any. I can walk down any street in Saskatoon, in any neighborhood. I've never once do the police drive slower past me. I could drive my lovely Volkswagen Passat. Never once has a police officer looked over at me at a light wondering if I actually own that car. I look like I belong in a Volkswagen Passat in the screwed up sense of what it means to be Canadian and a Volkswagen owner. White privilege means the color of your skin will determine whether you're given a second chance by a police officer or the justice system. It means a member of my family, God help us, if they were to go missing, the police system would jump to my aid and there would be public outcry on the news. This is unlikely for people of color in our country. And I'm not trying to be hard on police. They're just a really, really visible example of a systemic problem. The police can only profile because we allow it to happen and because, from us, it's what we actually believe in our hearts about those other people. Which reminds me, white privilege means that when a person of color commits mass murder, it's always assumed to be terrorism. But when it's a white person, we only talk about mental illness. Have you recognized that? Maybe this week. We talked about it again. Mass murder happens in the United States. Seems to happen there a lot these days. If it's a white person, a Caucasian person, it's always talked about their mental illness, their mental health history, broken family, all that stuff, never whispered as terrorism. That's white privilege. So the big questions for us to ponder when trying to be vigilant about white privilege are, why do we think being Canadian means white, English, or French speaking and Christian? Why do those of us who are Caucasian European descent believe what should look like and that that's a certain single way? I was in conversation with a woman around reconciliation. She said, there's so many nations, we're all one. Aren't we all supposed to be one thing? And I said, why? Well, that's Canada. I said, who taught you that? Who taught you that Canada's one thing? I actually thought Canada would be a lot of things. A lot of people from a lot of countries getting together and having a big called Canada. It's interesting why we hold on to things we don't even know where they came from. Unity does not, to be a unified country does not mean sameness. A strong and healthy country does not mean sameness. Those of us who are white-skinned, European background, need to become awake to the privilege system that we live in, that gives us advantages, so that we don't continue to live out its beliefs. Not so we can feel bad about ourselves, but so that we can recognize it and say, that is a major block to justice and equality in our country. A major block. More than that, it's a blind spot that's hard to see, so we need to have better conversations with more people so we can help hear what our blind spots are around white privilege. Because white privilege is how Caucasian European descendants have always shown up at the banquet. It's how we've always shown up at the banquet and chosen the seat right next to the host. Our system, our society is constructed in a way that encourages us, expects us to choose the highest seat of honor automatically. And Jesus says that's wrong and asks us to rethink it and teaches us to question it and calls us to choose a different seat. May it be so. Amen.